more straightforward than this Schroder Etude. I only have a few suggestions for fingerings kind of throughout. For the most part, they're just fine. For a lot of it, there's not really any suggestions. The first one is at measure 17 and 18. I was toying with doing a different fingering to avoid more of the string crossings. I wound up not, because as long as your bow is completely stuck and glued to the string, it's probably not going to be an issue. We'll get more onto that later. The alternate fingering I was thinking of was, and then go back to first position, or this one. That one basically staying in fourth position, all on the same string, rather than doing any string crossings. But we'll get into the bowing later and why that might be a good idea for you. The next one, at measure 20, I would rather eat my own leg than do a 1-1-1 fingering. Please don't. That's just do second finger on the A. At measure 23, I am shifting into second position. It just seems a little unnecessary to do two string crossings in the same measure when you can just do the A with fourth finger. In the very next measure, just play the G, the second G, with third finger so that the C sharp is within your grasp. That seems easy enough. In measure 28, instead of doing the extension back to 1, an extension between 1 and 3, I generally try to avoid. I would just do that in half position, just for a tiny shift instead. And I believe the next one I have is measure 50. Play the F with your first finger, and 51, I found myself gravitating towards 2-2-1 rather than 2-1-1, but that might be personal preference. And then finally, in measure 62, there's a second finger marking on the A. No idea why, don't do that. And that's about it for the fingering suggestions, of course. Let's get into the fun stuff, which is the bow stroke. Obviously, that is the key ingredient throughout this entire etude. Rule number 1 is just don't take the bow off the string throughout this entire time. At the very least, I should say, never ever think of taking your bow off. If it does leave the string, it's not the end of the world, but you never want to think of picking it up off the string. Every motion you're making should be going into the string. The bow will bounce up a little bit naturally. This bow stroke essentially starts here. As you can see, I'm doing it entirely with the fingers. You can also tell it doesn't sound particularly good, but that is the essential motion. This is directed with the fingers rather than the arm. It's not, but everything that happens outside of the fingers is only happening to essentially make the bow stroke prettier, or at least a little bit more bouncy and buoyant. But make sure that you're just digging into the string. All of your arm weight is sinking down into it. All of gravity is just sinking into the string. And you just release, essentially, with the fingers. As you go away from the lower strings, which is where most of the weight is going to happen, I mean, you can essentially play it just with the fingers down here and it will sound fine. But as you move away from that, start incorporating more of your arm for a bit of variety in the bow stroke, as well as adding some dynamics to it. Essentially, the dynamics with this kind of short bow stroke are all done just by changing how much arm you're using. As you can see, as I start to use more of the arm, less of the motion seems to be happening from the finger, but I still feel as though I'm directing it with the finger. And by that I mean leaning into the bow and pushing. I'm still doing that same pushing motion with the finger. It's just a bigger bow stroke. Going back to measure 18, technically speaking, the pickup into 18, the D included. The reason I mentioned this fingering is because there are 3 string crossings in a row, which is very unkind. As I said, as long as you are completely glued to the string, this should be attainable, but I would also consider it a bit of a dangerous spot to watch out for and to really, really practice, because in the heat of an audition, this bow might fly up off of it just a little bit, and you would be in trouble at that point. So I do urge you to at least test out the fingering, see which one helps you more. If the shifting is easier, then do the shifting, but if you feel like the shifting is harder than the bow stroke, then stick with the fingering that's here, or at least the one that's in first position. That's essentially all I have for this. It is, like I said, straightforward, just a few notes on fingerings, and then mostly just keep working on the bow stroke until it's very clean and articulate as you want it to be. And I hope this helped. See you in the next video.